I want to move, finally, to a brief discussion of sin and the Constitution. And to the extent you're willing to take a question home and, I don't know, think about it, I would actually like to ask you a question. Some of you may know, some of you may not know, but the definition of sin actually changes over time. There's a way in which our moral and religious leaders like to act as if the definition of a sin was the same 5,000 years ago as it is today, and anything else is complete moral relativism. But actually that's not true, and you can look at a number of fairly conservative denominations which only a few years ago constructed divorce as a sin and a taboo, but now say that divorce is not a sin. But with that in mind, the question I want to ask you, and I'm going to kind of walk down a slightly convoluted path for a minute, but you'll see where I'm going. I want to ask you, what kind of America do you want to live in? And what is your ideal for this country and for the law? And in order to kind of set up a range of possible answers to that question, I want to explain that there's a misconception about don't ask, don't tell, and it's an intentional misconception. A lot of people believe that don't ask, don't tell is all about punishing behavior. And in fact, those who defend don't ask, don't tell often go to great lengths to insist that don't ask, don't tell should be called the homosexual conduct policy, because what don't ask, don't tell really punishes is homosexual conduct. And in fact, there's a GAO report on gays in the military, and I found one page in the Government Accountability Office. One page in the report refers to the homosexual conduct policy 11 times on one page. So there's almost a kind of panic about insisting that don't ask, don't tell is a regulation of behavior, what people do, that it only punishes people who do something bad. But Janet Halley, who's a professor at Harvard Law School, she's smart, got tenure at Harvard Law School for a book she wrote called Don't, where she argued that to explain don't ask, don't tell as a regulation of behavior and not identity is to distort it. Because in fact, don't ask, don't tell punishes both behavior, saying that you're gay, getting married, or engaging in homosexual conduct, however that's defined. So don't ask, don't tell does punish behavior, but it is also a regulation of identity. And many of us have heard of cases of celibate gays and lesbians who were fired from the military, not for doing anything wrong, but just for being gay. And so this is really a regulation, according to Halley, that punishes what you do and who you are. And there's a very good reason why people who defend don't ask, don't tell want you to believe that this is only a punishment of conduct. And that is that in this country, constitutionally, in general, we like to let people have whatever status they want. If you want to wake up tomorrow and be a Jew, you can be a Jew. If you want to be a woman, you can even be a woman. People are allowed to pick whatever status they want in this country, and the Constitution makes it very, very difficult to punish people just for having an identity. I went to a conference of military ethicists and chaplains last year, the International Symposium for Military Ethics. I would encourage all of you to attend at some point in your careers if you can. And the chaplains went out of their way to talk the talk. One chaplain said, each person has inherent worth. Every person is equal to every other person. Another chaplain said, there are no religious extremists in the military looking to impose their vision on anyone else. Another said, we value diversity in all its forms. Another one said, we're here to represent all America, the best of America, inclusiveness. But let's be honest about why some people blocked President Clinton from repealing the ban on gays in the military, and why some people continue to oppose the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell. Nicely put, Some people believe, consistent with the thought experiment in this lecture, that homosexuality is immoral and prohibited by the Bible. Perhaps less nicely put are the words of Sergeant Major Mellinger in the Marine Corps Gazette in 1993, quote, "The Bible has a very clear message. Those that practice homosexuality are worthy of death." So, is homosexuality perverted? My answer, it doesn't matter. I want deeply to live in a country where the Sergeant Major Mellingers of the world are free to believe that gays deserve death, where anyone in this room is free to believe that homosexuality is immoral. But when biblical morality gets inscribed into federal law, and then that federal law is used to punish people for having an identity, just for being who they are, and when that federal law is used to decide who is a first-class citizen, who gets to serve in the military, which able-bodied person gets to do a job, and which able-bodied person gets fired, then I want to argue we no longer live in a free country. And so I would conclude by asking you again, what kind of country do you want to live in? The floor is open for questions for 20 minutes. Thank you very much. And I want to say, by the way, I don't care what you ask me. You can be as aggressive as you want, and that's fine. So let her rip, or not.
I'm C2C John Rogers, CS15. I had a question going back to your earlier argument saying that the military discipline welfare argument is basically ended. You said you cited your evidence as being some ways editorial. Evidence is not an editorial. But I don't have any of the evidence one way or the other. I don't know. I just have personal experience. Why in the military do men and women not share rooms together?
You're asking two questions, so I'd actually love to answer both. But if I'm not responsive, you push back.
The reason for the second question is men and women don't share rooms together because it's an issue with sexuality, with discipline. We don't do that. And if I'm going to be sharing, like other parts of the military, other parts of the civilian world, they don't live together. They don't have to do that. In the military, we do. We live together.
Right.
If I have to live in the same room, my bed's right next to another person who's attracted me, male or female, it's going to be an awkward situation. So, like, how does that work in with?
I want to push back before I answer, and I want to ask you, is the problem that you'd be uncomfortable? Is the problem that you'd be kind of afraid for your life at all moments, that something bad would happen? What would the problem be?
It's just an uncomfortable, awkward situation that you can't deal with.
Okay.
Like, it's something that we have certain standards. You don't do this, you don't do that, different things in general. And for example, at USAFA, we're not allowed.
Actually, can you stop for a second? It's bad enough to interrupt me. It's worse to interrupt your peers. So, yeah, go ahead.
Here at USAFA, we're not allowed to close the door if there's a guy and a girl in the room.
Right.
So that's the one side. I'm a little confused there.
Sure. I'm going to yammer for a few minutes. You push back if you disagree. First of all, on the Shalikashvili op-ed, I should have been more clear. The evidence that Shali was citing was the evidence that, to me, means that the debate is over. But we can go into that evidence. But that's not what you're asking, I think. But we can talk about that, too. In terms of men and women in the same room, or men in the same room, consensual sex happens in the military. It happens between men and men. It happens between men and women. It happens between women and women. And all of you know that, of course. It happens here. It happens in Iraq. It happens everywhere. Now, there are rules, of course, against that. There are rules against fraternization. There are rules, of course, against assault. But whether or not your roommate is gay, I would argue, is a totally different question than whether fraternization and things like that are going to be allowed. it is absolutely true that some people might be a little uncomfortable, or maybe even a lot uncomfortable. So we're not talking about like fear of rape, but just like discomfort. They might be uncomfortable sharing dorm rooms or shower facilities or being deployed with people of different sexual orientations. I guess I don't see how that's different than a situation where a white person is very uncomfortable with a black person, an atheist is very uncomfortable with a religious person is very uncomfortable with a Wiccan. The experience that I've seen from all organizations is that when leaders inculcate a norm of not liking each other but working together, that those discomforts go away pretty soon. Yes, we do need rules against rape and fraternization and things like that, but I don't think that's what you're talking about. But push back if you disagree.
Are you suggesting possibly by the same reasoning that men and women in the military should room together, or could?
Strangely enough, and I wrote a study on gays in military showers and published it in a journal called International Security. So I like to playfully introduce myself as like a world expert on nudity in military showers, but not through participant observation. But look, men and women don't dorm together and shower together in civilian society. So you don't in general have YMCAs or school locker rooms or hospital locker rooms where men and women are showering together. So to ask the military to adopt a standard that's different from civilian society is to ask the military to take a great leap indeed. That having been said, I cannot think of a single organization where gays and straights of the same sex don't shower together. I mean, can you imagine like the YMCA, like, the gays can't shower in the locker room? I mean, that would be absurd. So actually, we're not talking about having the military take a radical step. We're talking about whether or not the military should align itself with what everyone else in civilian society is doing. So, but do you see it differently, or? You see it differently? No, okay. Please, I mean, the floor is open, so, yeah. Oh, can we get a microphone on this side? Yeah. Because I think they're filming this for the masses, so.
My name's Carolyn Pope, sir, and I was wondering about some of your arguments that you made in the beginning. It seems like the main argument you made in the beginning was that the military is being inconsistent in treating, heterosexuals one way and gays one way, whereas, if they were completely consistent, everyone would be lawbreaker, that sort of thing.
Wait, if they were completely consistent?
Everybody would be lawbreakers, like according to the sodomy laws and everything.
It's not quite what I'm saying. I was making more of a philosophical point that if you're upset about gays and lesbians because gays and lesbians are lawbreakers, then you should also be upset about the straight people who violate 125.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
And the other inconsistencies in that gays and lesbians basically engage in, the same level of immorality that straight people do, or straight people also engage or tend to engage in the same level of immorality.
To be very, very frank, in terms of like the level, I mean, some people would say a lot of people of all sexual persuasions engage in a lot. I'm sure there are scientists who quantify the level. What I would just say is straight and gay people engage in extreme practices a lot.
Yes, sir. Well, if, like I do, I'm sure there's a lot of classmates here, I'm not sure what percentage, that believe the same way I do, that homosexuality is just wrong across the board.
Yes.
So if you're to basically condone that and say, all right, now homosexuals, we'll allow you into the military as a specific group, specifically condoning your lifestyle, to me that's a lot different than saying straight people, even though we know that some of them do tend to engage, this is the group that we allow in. It doesn't necessarily condone like lewd acts that straight people do. But if you believe that homosexuality is wrong, to allow them in the military as a specific group, you have to condone their specific actions and continuing their specific actions.
Yes.
And that also goes along with the amnesty thing you were talking about. All that stuff applies to past offenses, does it not? And so to allow a homosexual into the military, a practicing homosexual, we're not talking about something that was in the past, something they were convicted for and punished for. We're talking about a continuing behavior. And so it just doesn't seem to be comparing apples to apples to me.
I hear your point, and you like that? Then the question, though, to my mind, I'd be interested, I'm not going to ask you this, but I would be interested in just kind of like a survey, like how many people were clapping. The question to my mind is, why is homosexuality wrong? In other words, if the fact that some straight people engage in extreme sex does not mean that all straight people are guilty and should be thrown out of the military, why does that mean that the fact that some gay people engage in extreme sex mean that all gay people should be thrown out of the military? To me, that's logically inconsistent. And I think what it comes down to, unless you have a different rationale, is it almost always comes back to the Bible. From what I hear, like, well, it's wrong because God says it's wrong. And well, just 1 second before you respond, that's fine if you believe that the Bible says homosexuality is wrong. My question is, what are the costs of moving from that moral belief into an inscription of that moral belief into federal law? Go ahead.
Yes, sir. And I understand what you're saying, but that seems like a totally different debate to me, because we're talking about, the classic thing where people are like, well, you can't legislate biblical morality, but everyone legislates wherever their morality comes from. I mean, you can't do otherwise. Anytime you do some legislation, you're legislating a morality. So you're getting into a completely separate debate about whether the Bible is legitimate or not. We're not talking about common ground here.
No, I'm not. I'm granting that the Bible is legitimate. Go ahead.
Well, I'm more interested in, what would be an argument for allowing gays in the military based on a common ground where someone that believes like you could meet me as someone believes that homosexuality is completely wrong, any practice of it at all, not just extreme homosexual acts. How do you find some common ground and argue to me that allowing gays in the military is the right thing to do, other than saying, well, our beliefs are different, homosexuality is a choice or not, or whatever?
It's a good point. I guess I would respond in 3 ways. First of all, there may be no common ground. We may never be able to convince one another, is one possibility. A second is, as I was trying to argue, one question is, just forgetting homosexuality for a minute, let's grant that there are a lot of people in the military who think other groups are just wrong. It's wrong to be a Wiccan. It's wrong to be atheist. It's wrong to have made terrorist threats. Is it appropriate to take those beliefs about other people being wrong and turn that into a legal ban against an entire class? So we may or may not agree that it's okay for one group's feelings about the morality of another group to be instilled in law. That could be a second possibility. And a third possibility is we could sidestep the moral debate, which is actually what the Joint Chiefs said in 1993. They said, this debate should not be decided in terms of morality. It should be decided in terms of what's best for unit cohesion. And we could look back to the original question, well, what is the evidence about unit cohesion? And then we'd have a conversation about the facts, like what happened during the first Gulf War when the ban was lifted temporarily via stop loss. Did cohesion suffer? What happened in Britain, et cetera, et cetera. So any of those 3 options are possible. We may not be able to convince one another.